back to the show. My name is Brian Eskow, and this is Searching for Political Identity. Great to be with you, and I'm glad you're here. My guest today is Dr. Guy Golan. He's a university professor and co-author of this incredible book that I'm looking at right now that has a long title called My Brother's Keeper, The Complicated Relationship Between American Jews and Israel. What does it mean to be a Jew? What does it mean to be an American Jew? These are foundational questions to this book and questions that I'm asking myself. I know that internally that this tortured sense of what is my identity as a Jew, as an American, is really at the foundation of my search for political identity, even if I haven't been talking about it for these past 3 years that I've been doing this podcast. I think you'll understand as you hear this conversation that it really is totally relevant to what I'm going through. So, amazing book. Please go get it. And thank you so much to Dr. Golan for joining me. And I can't wait to have him back for a follow-up conversation. We just started to scratch the surface here, asking some of these questions and trying to help me find my way. And through that process, we talked a lot about American politics, Israel, why Israel is perceived the way it is. So just really proud to have snatched a guest of Dr. Golan's quality. And I'm glad you're here. I am a little sick. I got the COVID booster. Don't ask. And I've been sick for 2 weeks. So I think it affected my performance as a podcast host in this case. Not my best performance. So please accept my sincere apologies, audience and Dr. Golan, for maybe I rambled and wasn't on point as much as I should have been. But I'm sharing the conversation with you nonetheless because too much value in it, too relevant to what I'm doing. So I promise, Dr. Golan, the next time we talk, it'll be even better. But ladies and gentlemen, that's all I've got for the intro. Thank you so much for being here. If you want to help the show grow, of course, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. And without further ado, I hope you enjoy this, because as much as this podcast is about me finding my identity politically and otherwise, it's also about providing value to you. And I hope that you do find value in this conversation. So cheers, and I'll see you next week. Guy, welcome to the program, man. Thank you so much for doing this.
Hey, good morning.
I don't know how we connected. Did you find me on Twitter?
I think so.
Yeah. Well, I'm so grateful that you did and honored that you're here, because this book, I'm not trying to flatter you or be cute, and I am going to hold it up. This book that we're going to be talking about, okay, is extraordinary. Like I told you before we started recording, I finished just under half of it, and I've digested it sufficiently, I think, to have a really good conversation with you. And I'm really looking forward to finishing it. This is hitting me. You know, this is a special conversation I think we're going to have for me, because it just right over the target. Like I said, this just hits squarely for me, right between the two eyes, about what's going on in my heart and my soul, and has been for so long. The reason I started this podcast, Guy, for so many years I felt torn growing up with my conservative Jewish cousins, who I love and respect and admire so much, hardcore Zionist, and my progressive father, who's a Reformed Jew and less of a tie to Israel. And after reading much of your book, I now understand that tension a little bit more. But feeling torn between two worlds, in the Jewish, just alone the Jewish identity, and then the political identity, going to law school, coming from a Democratic background and studying critical race theory, which I think we will definitely talk about because it's relevant. So all these things that I've been thinking about for the last few years and for the last many years are really coming to, you know, the forefront of this book. So it's really incredible. And I really recommend anyone who's Jewish or interested in this concept of the relationship between Jews in America and Jews in Israel, or Jewish identity, American identity, should definitely read this book. Once again, thank you. And it's an honor to have you. So much of this is really not just the story of Israel and America and Jews, the different Jewish groups, but American identity too. What does it mean to be American? I mean, there is so much going on here. So much of what we're going to talk about is relevant to the political discussion that we're having in America today about globalism and nationalism, right? So it's almost difficult for me to figure out where to jump in. But would you agree with me that these thoughts about Trump and nationalism and critical race theory, which is itself kind of a conversation about assimilation, and with Black Americans, these concepts are all related, are they not, to a sense of political identity? And what is your reaction to that long-winded, jabbering introduction?
I love 3 minute questions. They're great.
Haha.
Yeah. Look, Israel is really an interesting country. And think about it, Brian. Everybody in the world has an opinion about Israel, and everybody talks about Israel. If you look at news media coverage, Israel gets more coverage per capita than any other nation on earth by far. It's not even close, right? So you had the war in the Congo where millions of people have died. Most Americans never heard of it.
Right.
500,000 civilians died in Sudan. Have you ever heard of that?
Right.
500,000 civilians died in Syria. Did you see marches across college campuses and demonstrations and boycotts? You didn't. So why is everybody so fascinated with Israel? And the answer is that Israel is a thorn in the West. And it's a thorn for the West, and especially for the left in the West, because Israel is the only Western nation that is both proudly nationalistic and proudly religious. And when you really look at the ideology of the left in the last 50 years, there is a clear rejection of both religion and of nationalism. And the easiest way to see it is when the left criticizes Trump supporters, they call them Christian nationalists, right? So they use it as a four-letter word, right? Israel is a proud nationalistic nation and religious nation.
Right. Yes, this idea, and this is part of the reason why I felt myself drifting a little bit to the right lately, is like, when did it become a dirty word to say that you're a patriot or to say that you have pride in your country? But it does seem, like you say in the book, and like I got exposed to firsthand studying critical race theory in law school, that it's all of a sudden an oppression narrative. Everything is oppression. Nationalism is colonialism. And you write in the book about how nationalism at one point was the reaction to colonialism. It was the antidote, excuse me, I'm under the weather and I'm still waking up, antidote to colonialism. And now it's viewed as a poisoning in the body. So are we returning to, so globalism is really a way for people on the left these days to feel vindicated about rejecting this colonial national structure. And is this a return to imperialism, though? So there's a broad historical view that you can have about this, but the oppression narratives are certainly on the rise. I felt that, and that is a large influence on why I'm searching for my political identity nowadays.
Yeah, listen, absolutely. So, it's kind of like the stock market. People overreact to the upside and to the downside, right? So after World War II was the height of nationalism and the form of fascism. And that brought us an absolute disaster. Tens of millions of people died across Europe. So after World War II, there's a complete rejection of nationalism, and Europe moves from the far right to the far left. And what we see in the course of the next 50 years is an attempt to erase identity, national identity. So Europeans move away from being Italians, Spaniards, and Frenchmen, and towards being Europeans. Borders are erased. Anybody who's in the EU can work anywhere in Europe. Anybody can move anywhere in Europe and consider to be just as French, just as Swedish, just as Danish as people who've lived there for 500 years. And currencies. Think about currencies. The national symbol, your country's currency, is erased. So no longer do we have the lira and the franc, right? And those are replaced by the euro. So moving from the far right to the far left, and this attempt at erasing any differences between people. But the problem with trying to erase any difference between people is that it goes against social psychology. We find our identity through our group membership. And there is a reason why people want nationalism. Czechoslovakia broke apart, because the Czechs and the Slovaks didn't see themselves as one. And there's a reason why there is a country called Norway, Sweden, and Finland, and there is not just one big piece of territory up north.
Yeah, and America is an interesting place because we are different than these European countries and I don't know about the Middle East as well, but they have these people have historical ties to land. And so I guess this gets into the question of what is Judaism and what is the relationship to the land of Israel? So let's get into, I think, the first topic that you hit in your book that it resonated so hard for me, which was this idea that Reform Judaism basically was born out of the fact that Jews were successfully able to assimilate into the United States. And well, the United States, so was it born in the United States or Europe as well?
No, it was born in Europe, right? So Jews lived as marginalized people and did not receive citizenship for most of their history when they lived on the European continent. Then in the late 1800s, the emancipation movement began. And Jews were offered a simple deal. Take off those funny hats, take off the funny clothes, stop being so different, and become regular European, right? So emancipation opened the door for Jews to become citizens of Germany and Holland and France. And Jews took that emancipation deal, and it worked really well for them for about 100 years. Emancipation led for Jews leaving the shtetl, right, the separate life, and joining and becoming regular Europeans. And Jews rose to the very top of all European positions, including during World War I. Jews were in leading places in Germany. So everything worked out really well for the Jews in Europe for about 100 years until it went wrong. And you know what happened in the Holocaust.
Right. And so, as you write in the early chapters, Jews did, after these horrors, become, over time, have success being emancipated and assimilating, and then they shed the religious identity, or not the religious identity, but the national identity and some of the other cultural identities to blend in. And so now we have this dichotomy, this split within Jewish people, which is to say that some feel that Judaism should move forward in time, and these are the Reform Jews, move forward in time and blend further and weave, as you say, into the cultures and spiritually enlighten the host nations, but to blend in, not to go backwards, whereas the non-Reform Jews, the Jews who have settled in modern day Israel, or returned, you might say no, the vision is to moving forward is actually moving backwards physically, geographically to the land of Israel. So it's this split.
Well, let's simplify it. Okay. So when we talk about American Jewry, we're talking about, roughly 2% of the population of the United States, about 8 million people. And because of intermarriage, it's really hard to count the Jews, right? If you marry a Gentile, are your children Jewish or not, right? So it gets really hard to count. But out of those roughly 8 million Jews in the United States, about 70% fall under the larger umbrella of the Reform movement. And you have under that conservative and constructionist and all types of splinter groups. But what is unique about Reform Judaism is that it serves a purpose. And its only purpose is to allow Jews to live in a land of Gentiles as minorities, right? So the entire attempt of the Reform movement is to allow Jews to be able to drive to synagogue on Saturday because, your synagogue is far away, and not to hold on to the, many requirements of kosher food and of dress and, of eating, certain types of meats and all of that. So basically to become regular Americans. Now, you have to understand, Reform Judaism only really exists in the United States and maybe in tiny parts of Europe these days. In Israel and in most of the Jewish world around the world, there is Judaism, and Judaism has stayed the same for the last 5,000 years. So the Reform movement really gives an answer to problems of Jews who live as a minority in the United States.
Yeah, it's a unique problem that people like me have, this internal split of I've been told from the Reform movement that Judaism is just a religion. And so you're an American. I'll tell you a story that actually, if I had my wits about me, I would have started with, because I would have said, Guy, I have the perfect story to open this conversation.
Let's start over. Go ahead.
Let's start over. No. So I was on my birthright trip. I was 20. I'm 34 now. So 14 years ago, I'm doing my birthright trip, and I never felt connected to Israel. I never felt particularly Jewish, but I managed to allow my mom to convince me to do this. Honey, do it. You'll have fun.
I love the accent. Go ahead.
Yeah, I had a blast. I had a great time. And on the second to last night, I called my grandma from Tel Aviv, who grandma lives in New Jersey, how you doing, Grandma? How is it? I said, I'm having a great time, blah, blah, blah. And she goes, do you feel like you're home? And I said, Grandma, I'm from New Jersey. So that sums up this quandary of like, wait, am I home? Why would she say that I feel home? So even though I went to Hebrew school and I was bar mitzvah, I understand intellectually this concept that I'm supposed to be connected to this land, but it's a strange feeling to be an American Jew.
Well, it's a wonderful thing to be an American Jew, and it's wonderful because you get to live in the greatest country on earth, and it's the greatest country on earth. The reason why it's so great, especially for Jews, is because until a year ago, this was the only country where American Jews or where Jews never had to deal with institutional anti-Semitism. So, as you know, in Europe, anti-Semitism was a national sport for hundreds of years, and governments use anti-Semitism as a way to scapegoat and as a way to really activate their base when needed. So, you know, when there was a recession, they would blame the Jews and send, you know, their supporters to go and burn villages and rape, you know, Jewish women and plunder and all of that. You never had that in the United States. Never, ever, ever. I'm not saying Jews didn't face anti-Semitism at an individual level, but in the institutional level, Jews never experienced anti-Semitism in the United States. And this is why you didn't have to deal with your Judaism. And this is why Reform Jews were just like, yeah, we're chilling. We're Americans who also happen to be Jewish, right? Now, one of the main concepts in our book is that you can really understand one's political ideology and political identity. So I know you're searching for yours, and we're going to try to help you today. One of the key predictors of your political ideology, where you find your political home, is your religiosity. So it's very simple, right? American Jews, remember we said 70% of them are Reform and not very religious. We have very high rates of atheists and agnostics amongst American Jews. So overall, American Jews are some of the lowest in terms of overall religiosity. And when we say religiosity, we mean how important is religion in their everyday life? How much guidance do they get in their everyday life from their religion? So because they're so low in religiosity, American Jews, and for other reasons, have always been a part of the Democratic Party and the political left, right? And because the political left is the home of people who are trying to fit in, trying to find their home. So when Jews came to the United States in the mass immigration in the early 1900s, they settled in New York City, in the Northeast, and Baltimore, and they quickly became a part of the Roosevelt coalition of FDR, ethnic whites, you know, Italians, Irish, Polish, right? And the whole thing was, hey, let's fit in, let's have everybody love us, and let's be champions for the weak. And ever since then, Jews were part of the social justice movement, right? Yes. And I don't mean the BLM movement. That's not social justice. I'm talking about, you know, labor rights. I'm talking about civil rights, the civil rights movement in the 60s. Jews were like hand in hand with Martin Luther King, like from the early days, the gay right movement, right? So Jews were always a part of this coalition of the oppressed. And this is something that is central to Judaism, and this attempt to adhere to the values of the Democratic Party, of inclusion, of equality, of fitting in, is something that American Jews are not only practicing in their political life, they actually bring it into their religious life. So when you look at, in some of the later chapters of our book, we talk about how Reform Judaism is different than Judaism. And, you know, when you look at the prayer books, Jews have been using the same prayer books for thousands of years. And in all of those prayer books, there's a yearning to go back to Israel. It always talks about the Jews as the chosen people of God, right? Well, those values don't really fit into the narrative of people who are trying to become accepted as citizens in a Gentile nation and who think that inclusivity and equality are the most important pillars of society. Right. So what you see is that Reform Judaism, they changed the prayers. They changed the prayers. They took out many of the yearnings to go back to Israel, and they took out many of the prayers where Jews thank God for selecting them as the chosen people. And they replaced that with language that is very similar to language you will hear in democratic circles.
Yeah, it's quite unbelievable. I mean, you have so much. Yes, you have anti-Semitism, but you also have people who just say, I guess it's anti-Semitism. People who say the Jewish instinct is supremacist. There's a supremacist notion to it. So what's the response to that from a traditional Jewish perspective? Because, to be a chosen person of God, I mean.
Well, I think again, you're hearing the language of people who are not religious. Because if you read the Quran, Muslims are, the people of God. And when you read the Catholic books and the Protestant books, definitely, anybody has a relationship with Jesus is going to be, going to heaven, while the others are not, right? So guess what? It goes back to the notion of, can people belong to different groups, and can some groups be better than other groups, right? Is there such a thing as right or wrong? Or is everything, is everything relative, right?
Right.
So again, the left in its ideology of, everybody is inclusive and everybody's the same and there are no differences between people, right? Though that paradigm is not consistent with the paradigm of religious people.
Right. Yeah. And so at some point, the narrative, I don't want to speak for the general public, but it does feel, and I think you say this in the book, that at some point Israel became perceived as a Goliath rather than a David. At what point does this group who just wants to be in their home and free, and really that's it, at what point did they become an oppressor? And so how did that narrative come about?
It's a really good question, right? So it's hard for young people to remember, but Israel used to be the darling of the left in the United States and in Europe, right? The Jews coming home to their homeland, it was, don't forget, Israel was colonialized by the Turks for a very long time. And later it was colonialized by the English. And then Israel was established as a tiny, tiny nation. From day one, it was under siege from 7 Arab nations who were trying to destroy it from day one, right? The day that Israel was declared, the next day you have the Israeli War of Independence and 7 armies attack a tiny nation with barely no army. Somehow Israel survived. The real change in narrative came as a part of 2 different things. First, the Cold War. The Soviets identified Israel as a capitalist American base within the Middle East. And during the Cold War, for people who are not familiar with that time period, the world was pretty much divided between the blues and the reds, right? It's not the Crips and the Bloods. It's, the blue was the West, so Europe and the United States and Australia, and the reds was like the communist bloc. And the Soviets were exerting their influence, so the red influence across the Arab world. So you had a lot of pro-Soviet Arab leaders, such as Nasser of Egypt, and you had communist movements throughout the Arab world. At the same time, Israel was, after the 6-Day War, was 100% with the West, with the United States, even before in '56 with the British and the French. The Soviets used Soviet propaganda to discredit Israel because they wanted to gain favor with the Arab people. So that's where this narrative on the left turns from pro-Israel to anti-Israel. So early in the days of Israel, Israel was a socialist country. Most people don't know this. And one of the biggest supporters of Israel early on was the Soviet Union. Mm-hmm. So Israel started out as a socialist country, and we had the kibbutz movement. I don't know if you ever had been in a kibbutz. It was a collective society where everybody worked according to their ability and received according to their needs. It was, oh my God, socialism 101. So in the beginning, early days, Israel is the darling of the socialists, of the communists, of the left. Then Israel moves away from that model, becomes more of a capitalistic nation. And that's the first thing. So that's the first thing that led Israel to turn from David to Goliath. right? The Soviet Union trying to discredit it to gain favor with the Arabs.
Mm-hmm.
But the second thing is the rise, and you can speak about this a lot because you took that class, and luckily enough, I never had to sit in a critical cultural, what's it called, critical race theory
Mm-hmm.
class.
Mm-hmm.
Complete waste of time, if you ask me. And you can ask me why in a second. But this notion that everybody in the world is either an oppressor or an oppressed, right? How cookie cutter is that? In the very, very complex geopolitical world of the Middle East, where there are a million details to understand, comes a paradigm that says, look, it's very easy to understand the Middle East. You have the good people and the bad people, the oppressors and the oppressed. So Jews are European and Arabs are native people, and therefore the Israelis are the colonialists and they're no good. There are many holes in this story. First of all, most Israelis are not Europeans, right? Jews have lived in the Middle East longer than Muslims have lived in the Middle East. Jews lived in Yemen. Jews lived on the Arab Peninsula of Saudi Arabia. Jews lived in Iraq and Iran way before Islam came. And do you know how we know that? Because in the Quran, there are descriptions of battles where the Prophet Muhammad kills Jews, right? So the Jews have always been in the Middle East, and more than 50% of Israelis come from the Middle East. So are these the Europeans that all the college kids with the kafiyas are wanting to send back to Poland? So again, the narrative of critical race theory, post-colonialism, all of that presents Israel as an alien to the land of Israel, the Jews as aliens to the land of Israel, without knowing any history that is proven by archaeology that Jewish people have always lived in the land of Israel.
So why is it so, this is a deep question, but why is it so important for Jews to be connected to Israel?
It's very simple. If you're a religious Jew, you believe that the land of Israel was covenant to the Jewish people 5,000 years ago. I mean, that's God's promise to Abraham.
Right. It's the foundation. It's so interesting how, and I am not trying to be cute or funny here, but it's so interesting how there is a land aspect of this amazing, rich, deep, profound religion. But then again, what is Judaism? It's a religion, it's an ethnicity, it's a nation. Is it all of the above?
It's a very simple question. If you're from Israel, the answer is all of the above. We are one people, and we are responsible for one another. And this is where Reform American Jews somehow miss the point. And that is, if you only view yourself as a Jew, but and this is the social psychology of political identity, right? If we start our book with a story about John F. Kennedy. He goes to the Protestant convention in Houston, and he is trying to quail concerns about whether or not he, as the first Catholic U.S. president, would answer to the Pope. And he says, to them, listen, I'm an American citizen who also happens to be Catholic. A lot of American Jews are Americans who just happen to be Jewish, right? So, the Jews for Palestine, that you see on college campuses and hugging the Hamas supporters in the demonstrations, it's like their Judaism is number 55 on their identity list, right?
Right.
So, but if your identity is, if your Judaism is your primary identity, you understand yourself to be a member of a people, right? It's not only a religion, it's a people. And again, with people comes mutual assurance.
Yeah, that's why anti-Semites and people who don't understand Jews often refer to them, us, I should say. Isn't that interesting how just in that language choice alone, but refer to Jews as tribal, because there is something tribal, if you will. There is a bond, there is a connection that is very profound. And so,
well, Brian, aren't you an MLB? Aren't you a member of the tribe?
I am. So I'm 70. So my ancestry test, it's 75% Ashkenazi Jew, and so I've got a 25% Gentile.
There you go.
There's that. So, and the 75% that I have is Reform Jew, right? So this is tough, man. This is
so you're okay. So again, so are you Jewish light? You know, the answer is not, right? I mean, look. So let's talk about how wonderful American Jews are. Can we say that? Can we talk about that?
Me specifically, yes.
Okay, very, very good. Look,
please.
First of all, the vast majority of American Jews love Israel and are proud Zionists. We know that. After October 7th, the outpour of support amongst American Jews was unbelievable. American Jews dug deeply into their pockets and sent billions of dollars to support the people of Israel. So remember we spoke about mutual assurance, taking care of one another? Are we one people? Forget all the big talk. Okay, forget Bernie Sanders and screaming on the stage. When it came to the ultimate test, when Jews were under attack in Israel, American Jews stepped up and supported the people of Israel. We are one people, no doubt, right? I mean, no doubt about it. So, you know, American Jews and Israelis have different political psychologies because they have different levels of religiosity. They view themselves differently. And there's one more thing, which is a huge concept in our book, and that is the psychology of American Jews is different than Israeli Jews because in Israel, you are the majority. Okay, you're not a minority, you're the majority. So it's kind of like being in school, right? Like if you're the only black kid in school, you're going to have a different psychology than if you go to an all-black school, right? So think about this. In Israel, Israelis speak their language. They speak the ancient language of Hebrew. They walk on the land where their forefathers walked thousands of years ago. They're using the shekel, their own currency. Their religious holidays are national holidays, right? So it's not like my kids who have to deal with Hanukkah during Christmas. In Israel, everybody celebrates Hanukkah and Sukkot and all the Rosh Hashanah, all the major holidays. This difference between being the majority group and minority group leads to completely different political psychology.
Yeah. The thought, you know, I didn't really want to take it in this direction, but the thought that comes to my mind now is referring back to some of these people, some who are fairly called anti-Semites and others who you might say are just people who believe in Christian nationalism. They believe that America should not be a multicultural institution, but a white Christian nationalist place. I don't know why my mind went there, but you can understand maybe talking about the fact that a nation exists that is religious in this. There's something interesting about Israel, right? You can't put your finger on it. It's unique. Is Israel unique?
Well, again, you just pointed your sociological discomfort with the concept of religion and nation and the combination of the two. So
I've been raised to, right? Have I not been raised to in America? It's just not the culture I was raised in.
So Brian, take our I think some of the last two chapters in our book talk about. So I think it's chapter 12 talks about why Christian Zionists or evangelical Christians love the Jews. I didn't say love Israel. I said love the Jews. And the next chapter, which you haven't read yet, is why do American Jews distrust evangelical Christians? And this is a really interesting thing that most people don't know about. When it comes to the fight against anti-Semitism in the United States, the allies of the Jewish people are not the left. It's the right. Evangelical Christians have done more to fight the BDS movement, have done more to fight anti-Semitism on college campuses, have done more to fight the anti-Israel narrative in politics. Nobody's done more than the evangelical Christian group, right? So organizations like Christians United for Israel, John Hagee, and Gateway Church, where I live, right, in Dallas, and all the mega churches in the South, those are the best friend of the Jewish people.
Right.
How do you feel sociologically about that? How would you feel if I invited you to an evangelical Christian church? Would you feel comfortable amongst
100% comfortable? Yes.
Good, you should, because those are your friends. Do you ever watch the show Everybody Loves Raymond? You know that show?
I used to watch it, sure.
All right, so do you remember the wife of Raymond?
Yeah.
All right, so Patricia Howell, I believe is her last name. She is a wonderful person, and she just started, after October 7th, she started a group called, I think it's 072. Actually, I'll look it up, right? So the purpose of, and again, Patricia, I'm sorry I forgot the name of your organization. O7C or something like that. And the purpose of her group is to build bridges between Christian churches and the Jewish people. And there's so many outreach programs like it. Evangelical Christians view anti-Semitism as going against the word of God.
Right.
They believe in the promise that God made to Abraham. They believe, there's a quote in our book, those who bless the Jews will be blessed, and those who curse the Jews will be cursed. Have you heard anything like that on the progressive left in the last 10 years?
No. Yeah. So why has the progressive left developed such a disdain for Israel?
You said in that class, right? Critical race theory, oppressors and oppressed, right? Europeans versus native people, good guys versus bad guys.
Yeah.
And this is like, you think you're looking for your political identity? Progressive Jews are looking for their political identities. So in the last, as I said, Jews were always a part of the left, always. Civil rights movement, labor rights movement, women's rights movement, gay rights movement, trans rights movement, fighting Islamophobia. Jews were always there.
And they want to be there with and I'm so ignorant, so just take the statement for what it is. They want to be there for what they view as an oppressed Palestinian people. And so what do you say to them?
I have no problem with that, but they have a problem with that. So about when the critical race theory garbage surfaced up, right? When the post-colonial, and you have to understand, this post-colonial narrative came from college, university. I'm a university professor, okay? These post-colonial so-called scholars, they used to be like the weirdo in the end of the hall that nobody spoke to. But in the last 10 years, they moved from the end of the hall into the department chair's office. And their influence in academia has become very, very wide. And this is where this very dangerous and very divisive ideology comes into play. And this ideology has no room for Jewish people. None. Jewish people are now welcomed. And let me show you how, okay? I'll exemplify it very easy. If you are a member of the social justice movement and you're a Jew, you're presented a litmus test that is unique. You have to choose. Are you a social justice warrior, like Jews have always been in America, or are you a Zionist, meaning you support Israel? You can be both. Brian, do you think Arab Americans are asked to pledge their allegiance to the social justice movement or to their support for their home country? Right. Do you think Persian Americans do, or Indian Americans?
No.
Why?
Why? You tell me, please. Why?
Because deep in the heart of the post-colonial movement is a view of the Jewish people as white people who are white supremacists, right? Now, it's completely idiotic. Most Israelis are not Europeans, right? They're from the Middle East. My wife is half Turkish, half Iraqi, right? And, if you want to talk about, the Palestinian people and oppression and all of that, we can talk about that. But, can Jews become members of the far left, of the progressive movement? They're having a really hard time.
Yeah. And I'm not equipped or prepared to instigate a conversation about, I'm not trying to avoid it either, but I am simply not prepared to initiate a conversation about the oppression or lack thereof of the Palestinian people. I just don't know the history enough.
Well, how about I throw something really quick at everybody who's listening, okay? The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is super complicated, super complicated. And anybody who shouts, kill all the Arabs or kill all the Jews or kick everybody out from this side or the other one, or a two-state solution and, let's just have a ceasefire and everything will be okay. They simply are ignoring the complicated nature of the conflict. If there was a simple solution and Israel could stop the occupation or, living together with the Palestinians, it would happen the next day. Trust me, the two people don't want to live with one another.
So how should we view Israel then, as just any other country that deserves its respect? Or is this a stabilizing force in the world? Is it a destabilizing force? How should we view Israel?
Well, let's start. Let's touch on three different concepts. Okay. First of all, should Israel exist? Right. It's a ridiculous question. You know, everybody's talking about, does Israel have the right to exist? How many people are talking about, does Sudan have the right to exist? Does Iran have a right to exist? Does Pakistan have a right to exist? Have you ever heard a conversation about any other nation? 197 in the world. Have you ever heard anybody talk about any other nation? Does it have a right to exist? Even the
Right.
worst dictatorships, anybody say,
Right.
does North Korea have a right to exist? So question number one, why is it that the only country that people ask, does it have a right to exist? Why is it Israel? I'll let you decide. Second thing, what is Israel? Israel is a European country in the Middle East that is clashing within itself in the pull and push between left and right, between Europe and the Middle East, between modernity and tradition, and between globalization and nationalism. And all these tensions that I'm talking about reflect themselves every single day in Israeli politics. I don't know if you know this. While the Israeli people are 100% united in their love for one another, they're 100% divided in their politics.
That's amazing. That's quite deep. And so it seems sustainable. Is it sustainable? Is that sustainable?
Israel is a miracle. Israel was built on the ashes of the Holocaust. And when the Israeli people started their country, there were less than 500,000 people. And they were surrounded by hundreds of millions of Arabs who wanted to kill them all, right? I mean, the attempt to kill the Jews was from 1948, day one. Fast forward 60 years. Israel has 10 million citizens. 20% are non-Jews, 80% are Jews. Israel is a beacon of technological innovation. There are more companies traded on the NASDAQ from Israel than there are of any other nation on earth, with the exception of the United States and China. How is it that a tiny, tiny nation of 10 million, tiny, right? I mean, there are cities in India and China that are much bigger than this country. How has it survived? How is it flourishing? How does Israel have such a diverse and complicated democracy where you have Arab judges on the Supreme Court, where women from non-Jewish backgrounds are serving the highest offices in both government and of corporations and private business, right? So this country is truly unique and it's complicated. And this is why we wrote the book, Brian. We wrote the book because everybody's talking about Israel, but nobody understands Israel. We wanted to write something that was very easy to read. So we're both professors and academics, but this is a non-academic book. How long did it take you to read each chapter? It's like 5 pages each?
30 minutes to digest it, an hour, I mean, I might have read it each twice.
You're a slow reader. Yeah.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. And well, it is so easy to read, but it's so spiritually dense for me. It resonates with me so hard that I almost needed to study it like a textbook because it was stirring such profound thoughts within me. And I'm obviously still wrestling with it. So many of the chapters that I did read covered this very relevant to my podcast, tortured sense of identity. And so you mentioned that something in some of the later chapters that I hadn't gotten to, you mentioned a salad bar metaphor for religion. Can you explain to me what that is?
Yeah, sure. So Reform Judaism. Reform Judaism, again, very unique to the northern continent, the United States, right? There's really only one kind of Judaism. It's called Judaism, right? But in the United States, there is something called Reform Judaism, Conservative Judaism, Constructivist, all kind of different things. And how is it different? In Israel, most people don't know this. In Israel, most people are not religious. I mean, a large percentage of the Israeli population is either secular or traditional. Traditional means you do the services on Friday, and then you go out to the club and have a beer and drive a car, right? So you select, right? Mm-hmm. So this is a salad bar metaphor. Mm. In Israel, there's one salad bar, right? It's called Judaism, and it always had the same ingredients in it for 5,000 years. And people pick and choose what they want to take from the salad bar. Secular people will take nothing. Orthodox people will take everything. And, traditional people will take, whatever they feel like that day. In the United States, the salad bar is different because American Jews want to change the ingredients in the salad bar because they feel those ingredients are inconsistent with their political values. So again, the notion of Jewish people as unique people, as the chosen people of God, that concept is very uncomfortable for American Jews. So they took it out of their prayer books, right?
Mm.
The prayers that show any divisiveness or differences between groups, they took it out. They took those ingredients out of the salad bar, right? So again, when an Israeli walks into a Reform synagogue, and they can be the most secular Israelis on earth, they walk in and they see a woman wearing a yarmulke and a talit and all of that, and they see the guitar and the TVs, and they're like, "What is this place? This is not a synagogue."
Mm.
But when American Jews walk into an Israeli synagogue or Jewish synagogue anywhere in the world, pretty much outside of the United States and maybe tiny parts of Europe, they see chaos. First of all, men are separated from women, which is, how is that possible, right? Why do women and men pray separately, right? Again, it goes against the aesthetic of modern society, right? But men and women pray separately. And while in Reform synagogues, everybody sings together, in Jewish synagogues in Israel, everybody prays at their own pace, and there's a lot of chaos and a lot of noise, and people are not sitting in their chairs and they're moving around. So basically what we try to show in the book is that the versions of American Reform Judaism and the traditional Judaism that's practiced in Israel are completely different. And it's very interesting. And the way American Jews view their religion and try to assimilate their religion to fit the modern world is very indicative of their political ideology, their political sociology, and their political behavior.
It's no wonder I'm searching for political identity and having some sort of identity crisis, is right? I mean, it makes all the sense in the world, does it not?
Well, I'll give you another one. You're having a hard time finding your political home because you are an American. We live in the most individualistic country on earth, right? So in the United States, what is our common narrative, right? Individualism, football, freedom, and Bud Light.
Ironically, right? The common narrative is individualism.
Absolutely, and individualism is the most American thing on earth. Israel is a highly collective society. In Israel, as a child, you're taught about the Holocaust. You're taught about the struggles. You're taught about the fact that our people are endangered and that you have a role to play in conserving the Jewish people. You are a part of a very old and rusty train that goes back thousands of years. So when you feel like you're a part of something that's much bigger than yourself, you don't need to search because you already are home.
Yeah. I'm wrestling with all of that. And, I'm drifting in this political climate in America. It's easy, I think, for free thinkers, independents to, if not lean right, to be a little put off by what the left is doing, whether it's the process for choosing the president or the substance of what they've been saying. But I am wrestling with not only the currents in American politics, but my own sense of who I am and trying to discover that. There's no question about it. And so it's
I think Brian, I think you should enjoy your journey. You're not supposed, the thing that absolutely drives me nuts about college protesters is their level of confidence. You have 18-year-old children who have no world experience.
Exactly. I say to these people, where do you get this confidence?
So they come in and they shut down 70-year-old speakers, and they're like, "You don't know what you're talking about. You're a racist. You're a bigot because you disagree with me. Your opinion is not legitimate. I'm 18. I took genocide studies class. I know everything about the world."
Mm-hmm.
The beautiful thing about our identity, our religious identity, our political identity, our individual identity, is that it's a journey, and it is the journey that brings us to our identity, and it is the journey who makes us who we are.
Yeah. Well, I hope that in my slightly under the weather, state did enough to draw out from you this incredible information that's in the half that I read is incredible. I'm gonna obviously post the link in my show notes because I couldn't recommend the book more. It's so helpful to me. It's so important, this conversation. It's so important that we connected. I can't thank you enough for sending me the book. What do you see for me in the future, identity wise? What do you think?
Only good things.
Well, I guess we'll leave it there. So thank you so much. Is there anything else, any final thoughts you want to share with the audience, or do you think we did enough teasing to make anyone interested in this subject want to go grab this book?
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, sir.